The desert sun was sinking behind the red cliffs of Arizona, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold. Cowboy Jake Callahan rode slowly along the rocky trail, his horse's hooves stirring up dry dust that hung in the air like smoke. He'd spent the day herding strays and was headed home, hoping to reach his small ranch before nightfall. The land was silent, except for the whisper of the wind and the distant call of a hawk. Then, out of nowhere, a faint sound reached his ears, something soft, desperate, human. Jake halted his horse, tilting his hat back. "Help! Please, somebody help me!" The voice came again, faint and trembling, carried by the canyon wind. Without hesitation, Jake turned his horse toward the sound, kicking his heels lightly. "Hang on, miss," he muttered, urging the animal down a narrow path between boulders. He found her wedged between two massive stones near a dry creek bed. A young woman, her dress torn and dusty, her leg trapped under a heavy slab of rock. Her golden hair was tangled, her face streaked with sweat and dirt, yet even in that state, she was striking, her blue eyes wide with fear and pain. "Please, cowboy," she gasped, her voice cracking. "My leg, I can't move it. Please save me." Jake jumped down from his horse in one swift motion. "Hold on, miss. Don't you move. We'll get you out of here." He tossed aside his hat, knelt beside her, and examined the rocks. Her ankle was caught tight, bruised and swelling. He braced his boots in the dirt and tried to shift the stone, but it didn't budge. "It's no use," she whimpered. "You should just go. The sun's setting. You'll get lost." Jake shot her a steady look. "Ma'am, I don't leave folks behind. Now, take my hand and breathe." He grabbed a thick branch nearby and used it as a lever. With a grunt, he pressed down, muscles tightening under the strain. The rock moved an inch, then another. Clara, he didn't yet know her name, bit her lip to keep from crying out. With one final push, Jake forced the stone aside. Her leg was free. She cried in relief, covering her face with her hands. Jake knelt beside her again. "Can you move it?" She tried but winced in pain. "No, I think it's sprained." Jake nodded, scooped her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. She gasped, clinging to his shirt. You saved me," she whispered. He gave her a faint smile. "Just doing what any man should." As he lifted her onto his horse, she looked into his eyes and said softly, "I'll do anything to repay you, cowboy, anything. Even bear you a child, if that's what it takes." Jake froze for a moment, his breath catching. The desert wind fell silent. He looked away, tightening his grip on the reins. "Let's just get you safe first, ma'am," he said quietly, riding toward the fading sun, unaware that this meeting would change both their lives forever. The ride back to Jake's ranch was slow and rough. The setting sun cast long shadows across the desert, and Clara, though Jake didn't yet know her name, leaned weakly against his chest, her arms wrapped around him for balance. Every time the horse jolted, she winced, and Jake tightened his hold just a little, careful not to hurt her. "You're gonna be all right, miss," he said quietly, his voice steady like the rhythm of the horse's hooves. She looked up at him, her blue eyes tired but grateful. You saved my life, cowboy. I don't even know your name." "Jake," he replied simply. "Jake Callahan. And you?" "Clara," she whispered, resting her head against him. "Clara Hayes. My wagon, it broke near the ridge. The wheel snapped, and the horses ran. I tried to walk for help, but I fell between the rocks." Jake nodded. "You're lucky I was riding through that canyon. Most folks avoid it after dark." She gave a faint smile. "Then maybe fate sent you." They reached his ranch just as the stars began to bloom in the vast Arizona sky. The small cabin stood lonely among the open plains, a modest wooden house, fenced corral, and a flickering oil lamp by the door. Jake dismounted, carried Clara inside, and set her gently on a cot near the hearth. "Stay still," he said, lighting the fire. "You'll catch cold." Clara watched him move around the cabin with quiet strength, hanging his hat, fetching water, tearing a clean strip from a cloth to bandage her leg. She was surprised by his gentleness. Cowboys weren't known for soft hands or tender voices, but Jake had both. He knelt beside her, his rough fingers brushing lightly against her ankle. "It's swollen bad, but not broken," he said. "You'll need rest for a few days." She smiled faintly. "You sound like a doctor." Jake chuckled. "Just a man who's broken enough bones to know better." He handed her a tin cup of water, and as she drank, their eyes met in the firelight. For a moment, the world outside, the coyotes, the cold, the endless emptiness, faded away. You didn't have to bring me here, Clara said softly. Most men would have left me in that canyon. Jake looked at her with quiet conviction. I ain't most men. She studied him, the way his jaw tightened when he spoke, the weariness behind his calm. He seemed like someone who'd seen too much, fought too many battles, and learned to live with silence. As the fire crackled, Clara whispered, Jake, when I said I'd do anything to repay you, I meant it. Jake froze, meeting her gaze. You don't owe me a thing, Clara. You just rest. That's all the thanks I need. But she didn't look away. Still, she murmured, her voice soft but sure, I want to stay. At least until I can walk again. Jake hesitated, then nodded slowly. All right, Clara Hayes. You can stay. But just until you're better. Outside, the desert wind sighed against the cabin walls, as if whispering that nothing in life, or love, ever stays temporary for long. Days turned into weeks, and the little cabin that had always been silent now echoed with the sound of gentle laughter, the clatter of dishes, and the warmth of a woman's touch. Clara's leg healed slowly under Jake's care. Each morning, he would bring her fresh water from the well and make sure her ankle was wrapped tight before heading out to the pasture. In the evenings, when the sky turned crimson and the coyotes began their mournful songs, he'd return to find Clara cooking by the fire, her golden hair glowing in the lamplight. Jake had never known such peace. He'd lived alone for years, ever since the war had taken his family and the land had hardened him into silence. But Clara's presence softened something inside him. She filled the space not with words but with warmth, folding his shirts, sweeping the floor, humming old lullabies as she worked. One evening, she sat on the porch wrapped in his old wool blanket. Jake came up from the barn, his hat tilted low, a tired smile on his face. You're walkin' better, he said, noticing her standing without the crutch he'd made. Thanks to you, she replied, smiling faintly. I've been thinkin' I might start pullin' my weight around here soon. Jake leaned against the railing. You've done more than enough, Clara. Ain't had the place this clean in years. She laughed softly. Maybe that's what it needed, a woman's hand. There was a pause. The sunset stretched wide over the plains, painting her face in gold. Jake's gaze lingered on her, and she felt it, steady, uncertain, full of unspoken emotion. Jake, she said quietly, breaking the silence, back in that canyon, when I thought I was gonna die, I prayed. And when you came, I thought maybe God had sent me a sign. He turned his eyes toward the horizon. I ain't no angel, Clara. Maybe not, she said, stepping closer, but you're the kind of man who saves people. Even when he doesn't believe he can be saved himself. Jake exhaled, his jaw tightening. You don't know what I've done. This life, it ain't meant for a lady like you. Clara reached out, her hand brushing his arm. You gave me life, Jake. And I don't want to go back to a world without you in it. For a long moment, he said nothing. The only sound was the whisper of the desert wind. Then he turned, eyes softening. Clara, I ain't never had someone waitin' for me at home. But if you truly mean what you're sayin', I ain't fool enough to turn it away. She smiled through tears. Then let me stay, Jake. Not out of debt, but out of choice. Jake hesitated, then gently took her hand in his. If you're sure, Clara, then you're home. The last light of the sunset faded, and for the first time in years, the cabin felt alive, not just with warmth, but with love. Months passed, and the winds that once howled through the lonely Arizona plains now carried laughter from Jake Callahan's ranch. The man who had lived years in silence found his days full of sound. Clara's soft humming, the crackle of the hearth fire, the gentle rhythm of life shared between two hearts that had once been strangers. Winter had come and gone, and the land had begun to bloom again. Clara stood on the porch one morning, watching Jake work in the corral. His broad shoulders moved with steady grace as he repaired a fence post, the sun glinting off his hat. She smiled to herself, her hands resting gently on her stomach. Jake looked up and caught her gaze. You're starrin' again, he said, his voice teasing. Can't help it, Clara replied with a laugh. Never thought I'd see a cowboy who could make a home feel so safe. He grinned, tipping his hat. And I never thought I'd find an angel in the canyon. She blushed, turning away as her heart filled with warmth. The life they built wasn't rich in gold or luxury, but it was full of trust, kindness, and the quiet strength that only love can bring. That evening, as the sky turned violet, Jake returned to the cabin and found Clara waiting by the fire. Her eyes shimmered in the light, a secret glimmering behind them. Jake, she said softly, taking his hand, there's something I need to tell you. He frowned slightly, concern flashing across his face. You all right, Clara? She smiled, tears forming in her eyes. More than all right. Jake, we're going to have a baby. For a moment, Jake stood frozen. The words seemed too big, too beautiful to believe. You mean? She nodded, pressing his hand gently against her stomach. Yes, you saved my life that day in the canyon, and now, a new life's growing inside me because of you. Jake's throat tightened. He dropped to one knee, his rough hands trembling as he held her close. Clara, I don't deserve this, he whispered. I've lived too long without hope. But you gave me something I didn't think I'd ever have again. She cupped his face in her hands. You deserve every bit of happiness, Jake Callahan. You gave me a home when I had nowhere to go. Tears blurred his vision as he stood and pulled her into his arms. The desert outside was silent except for the wind, carrying their laughter across the plains. Months later, when their son was born, Jake held the tiny child in his arms beneath the same Arizona sky where they had first met. Clara rested beside him, smiling through tired eyes. He's got your eyes, she whispered. Jake looked at the child, then at her. In your heart, he said softly. The cowboy who once rode alone had found his purpose, not in the open range, but in the warmth of a home built on love, courage, and fate. And somewhere, beyond the canyon, the wind seemed to whisper their story. A tale of rescue, redemption, and the family born from both.